Hello, and welcome to Drunk on Tea. This week, I'll be taking on another 5-paint challenge, painting up this miniature as a Space Wolf Space Marine, using just 5 colours, which are Rust Grey, Averland Sunset, Leadbelcher, White Scar, and Abaddon Black. As you can see, I primed the model, so we've got a nice even base coat for all of our colours to work from. And the first thing I'm doing is I'm coming in with Rust Grey, and I'm going to paint all of the power armour on the model. So I'm putting some of this paint on my palette, and I'm thinning it down with just a little bit of water to get a nice smooth consistency, and it flows nice and easily off of the brush. And now I'm going to apply this all over the power armour of the Space Marine. You don't need to worry about being too neat at this stage. You can get some of this paint into areas that we don't want to be Rust Grey, because we'll be painting over it later with darker colours. But for now, just work your way around the model and paint all of that power armour in a couple of coats of Rust Grey. As this is a very thin paint, it won't give us fantastic coverage on the first layer, but just come back through with a second or third coat to build up to a nice solid colour of Rust Grey all over the power armour on the Space Marine. By keeping our paint nice and thin, we'll be applying this in smooth layers that won't clog up any of the details on the power armour. So just take your time, work your way around the model, and apply a layer of Rust Grey all over the power armour on our Space Wolf. And after the first coat, you can see it's still very patchy coverage, so I'm coming back in with a second layer of Rust Grey, building it up to a nice solid colour all over the power armour. If after your second coat it's still a little bit patchy, come back in with a third layer of Rust Grey until you do get that nice smooth, even coverage all over the power armour on the Space Marine. And after a couple of coats, you can see we've got a nice smooth colour all over that power armour. And next, with some Averland Sunset, I'm going to come in and I'm going to paint the shoulder pads on the Space Marine. Being nice and neat, trying to not get this over any of the Rust Grey we've already painted. And once again, this will take a couple of coats to build up to a solid colour. As you can see here, I've used the Space Wolves accessories pack, so I've got that wolf marking on the shoulder pad. But if you don't have this accessory pack, it's absolutely fine. You can just use a regular shoulder pad and either place some transfers or paint your own logos later. I'm also going to paint one of the knees here with Averland Sunset, as a lot of the Space Wolves use this knee as part of their company markings. And finally, I'm going to paint the Aquila on his chest as well. Normally this is painted in gold, but as I don't have a gold paint, I'm going to paint it using Averland Sunset. So once again, just make sure you cover these areas with a couple of coats of Averland Sunset to build up to a nice solid colour all over these areas. And after a couple of layers of Averland Sunset, you can see we've built up to a nice solid smooth yellow colour all over those pauldrons, knee pad and the Aquila. So next up, with some Abaddon Black, I'm going to come in, I'm going to paint all of the weapons on the model, being nice and neat around the power armour at this stage. So I want to make sure I cover all of the casing to his bolt pistol. Doesn't matter if I also paint the areas that will be covered in metallics later, because the Abaddon Black will give us a nice smooth colour for the silver to work off of. I'm also going to paint his chainsword here as well, so I'm going to paint the body, the engine, the teeth, and his handle and crossguard on his chainsword. any strapping on the model. So he's got these parts here on his back. Going to catch these with some Abaddon Black as well. And his belt going around his waist. And any pouches you've applied to your model as well. Catch all of these with a layer of Abaddon Black. At this stage I'm also painting the chapter marking on his pauldron here, just catching the wolf's head with some Abaddon Black. And finally I'm going to pick out all of the undersuit. So it's all of these ridged areas here coming out between all of the different panels of his power armour, catching these with a layer of Abaddon Black as well, being nice and neat around the power armour, trying not to get any of this over the rust grey. With all of those details picked out in black, the only thing left to apply now is the metal areas. So for these I'm coming in with Leadbelcher. I'm going to pick out any of the areas we want to be metallic. So that'll be areas like the muzzle, the magazine and the handle to his gun. I'm going to pick these out with a couple of layers of Leadbelcher, being nice and neat around all the areas we've already painted. I'm also going to pick out the engine on his chainsword. As well as the teeth. And I'm also going to pick out any of these vents on his backpack as well. Just going to cover these areas with a couple of layers of Leadbelcher. And with that Leadbelcher applied, there's all of the base coats applied to our model. So the next thing we're going to do, start shading some of these areas. So for this I'm coming in with some Rust Grey and Abaddon Black. It's going to be about a 3-to-1 mix, so I'm mixing the two colours together on my palette here. And then with some water, I'm going to thin this down so it's really thin and acts like a shade paint. So keep adding water until it flows really smoothly and will run into all of the recesses on the model. And now with a fine brush, I'm going to apply this into all of the recesses on the power armour. So in every join, every line, every segment between the panels, I'm coming in and putting a thin line of this shade into every single recess on the model. So this step will take a while, but it's really worth doing as it really adds interest all over that power armour and adds definition between all of the panels. I try and use a small brush here and get it exactly where you want, but if you do make any mistakes, once it's dried you can come in with some Rust Grey and thin any of these lines down if they've come in too thick. So once again, just take your time, work your way around the model and pick out every recess, every panel, every detail on the power armour and apply a thin pin shade of this mix into every single recess all over that power armour. It's really worth focusing on areas here like the face, because this will be a focal point to the model. So make sure you catch every recess here with a thin shade of this mix. By having the paint nice and thin, it will flow into all of these recesses rather than clog up any of the detail that would happen if we had the paint too thick. And with that recessed shade applied, you can see it's really added definition all over that power armour and made every single detail stand out. So now with some Abaddon Black, once again put this on my palette and thin it down with a load of water so it runs really smoothly, flows really easily off of the brush. So just keep adding water so you've got this really smooth consistency. And with this, I'm going to shade all of the areas we painted with Leadbelcher. So I'm just going to apply this all over, letting it run into all of the recesses and details on those Leadbelcher areas. Don't worry if you get this over any of the Abaddon Black, because it's the same colour, it won't show up once it's dried. But try to avoid getting this over any of the areas we painted rust grey. And I'm also going to apply this over the Aquila as well, just to add some definition and interest to all those feathers and details on the Aquila.
If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell.
And with both of those shades applied, you can really see how it's made all of those details stand out and added some interest to those metallic areas on the model. Now I'm coming in with some rust grey and white scar, about a 2-to-1 mix. I'm going to mix the two colours together on my palette. Thin it down with just a little bit of water so it runs nice and smoothly off of my brush. And now I'm going to edge highlight all of the power armour. So work your way around the model. At the side of every panel, every edge, every sharp line, I'm applying a really thin line of this mix as an edge highlight to make all of those panels pop out. Alongside the pin shade, this works really well to make all of these details stand out on the model, really add interest all over what can otherwise be some very flat looking power armour. So much like with the pin shade, it's worth taking your time at this step, making sure you pick out every panel and every line with just a thin edge highlight of this mix, just to make all of these details really stand out all over our Space Wolf. So use a nice thin brush for this step and keep the pressure on the tip nice and even, so you keep those lines the same. If at any point you come in a little bit too thick with one of these lines, you can cut back in with some rust grey just to make those lines thinner again. But just take your time, keep working your way around the model and picking out every panel with an edge highlight of this mix. And once again, it's really worth focusing and spending the time on the helmet as the focal point to the model. We really want to make this stand out, as this is where a lot of people will be looking when they look at the miniature. And finally, don't forget to apply the edge highlight to the details on the backpack as well. Just picking out every panel on his backpack with a thin edge highlight of this mix. Now with that edge highlight applied, that's really made that armour pop and stand out and added loads of interest all over the model. And now with some Averland Sunset, I'm going to come in and sink this into his lenses of his eyes to keep this nice and thin and only get this into the eyes pick them out with some Averland Sunset. And with the eyes painted up, the next thing we're going to do is highlight the yellow areas on the model. So for this I'm coming in with some Averland Sunset and White Scar. About a 2-to-1 mix again. So I'm mixing the two colours together on my palette. Adding just a little bit of water so it runs nice and smoothly off of my brush. And then I'm going to apply a highlight on the Aquila by placing this on all the raised areas. So there's places here like the skull and on all the wings and the feathers, just picking out the raised details with a little highlight of this yellow mix. I'm also going to apply an edge highlight around the knee pad we painted yellow as well, keeping this line nice and thin. And finally, in his eyes, I'm sinking a line of this mix just at the very bottom of his eye lenses, just to add some interest. And with those yellow areas highlighted, the next step is I'm just going to finish off his eyes. So for this I'm coming in with some White Scar. I'm just going to add a little spot in the back corner of each of his eye lenses. Keep these nice and small, just a little spot of White Scar in the back corner of his eyes. And with those eyes painted, there's only one last thing we have to highlight on the model. We're using some Abaddon Black and White Scar in about a 50-50 mix for this one. I'm going to mix them together to make a nice grey colour. Thin it down again with just a little bit of water so it runs nice and smoothly. For this I'm going to highlight all of the black details. So I'm going to do an edge highlight all the way around the gun casing, keeping this line nice and thin, but just picking out all of those panels and details on his gun. I'm also going to highlight his chainsword by giving this an edge highlight all the way around. I'm also going to pick out the handle and crossguard at this stage as well. I'm going to highlight any strapping, just catching the raised details, as well as the belt. And the undersuit as well. I'm going to pick all of these ridges out with a thin highlight of this grey mix, keeping this just on those raised areas on his undersuit. And finally, the chapter marking on his shoulder pad. I'm going to give this an edge highlight of this grey as well. So just add some interest and make it stand out. And with that black highlighted, you can leave the model here, just tidy up the base. But there's a couple of extra details I'm going to do just to make this really stand out. So with some Abaddon Black, I'm going to come in and I'm going to paint the chapter markings on the model. So for this, I'm just going to do 2 triangles on his knee pad and his shoulder pad, one from the top, one from the bottom. So at first with some Abaddon Black, I'm just drawing my lines in, being nice and neat, picking out the shape that I want to have for these triangles. And then once I'm happy with that shape, I'm coming back in with Abaddon Black. I'm just going to fill those in to get them to be a nice solid black colour on his knee pad and on his shoulder pad. For this you can use any shapes you want, any designs or patterns. Just pick a design you like that you can freehand. And with those markings applied, you can see that we've got those triangles on both his shoulder pad and his knee pad. And now I'm coming in with some white scar, and I'm just going to put a line around the very edge of that black of pure white scar. So keep this nice and thin, nice and smooth, just a line at the edge of my triangle with some white scar. And with that white scar applied, it's made those chapter markings stand out and be a little bit more noticeable and interesting on the model. So now there is just one step left to do to finish this model off, and that's come in with some Abaddon Black again and just tidy up the base. So just apply this all over the base in a couple of coats, being nice and neat around the feet. You don't want to get any of this black over the rust grey we've already painted, shaded and highlighted, but just cover all of the base with a couple of layers of Abaddon Black, so we've got a nice solid colour all over the base, just to tidy up and finish off the model. And with that base tidied up, that's how to paint a Space Wolf Space Marine using just 5 colours. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below what other Space Marine chapters you would like to see me take on in a 5 paint challenge. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!